Why do we need regulations? Well, there's frauds trying to cheat you, there's well-intentioned stupid people who can hurt you, and there's rich people trying to own you. So we needed a Food and Drug Administration. I'm going to tell you about the history of the Food and Drug Administration now. And basically, the FDA is there to control the quality of a product and to guarantee its safety and efficacy. So that's the primary factors. Then, also, the FDA is there to control the claims made by the manufacturer or salesperson to make sure that the people are not being lied. So if we go back into the 1700s, you see, Jenner was a homeopath, and vaccinations were developed. And then Louis Pasteur came up, and he had some really great things to say, but Louis Pasteur started to make a host of different vaccinations. And this started to expand. People were making vaccinations all over the place. The man who brought us germ theory recognized that germ theory isn't everything. The terrain is everything. And basically, then there were so many people doing this that they had to make the Vaccine Act of 1813, the very, very first time that Americans tried to regulate different things, and they needed some type of an FDA. Unprofessional people were making vaccines. They were hurting people, so the United States needed to do something to regulate vaccines. One of the very, very first efforts. You can read all about this in our books on the history of the FDA. And one of the greats was Harvey Wiley, MD. And basically, Harvey came up with an idea that people were killing themselves with sugar drinks. He started to see just the effect of the sugar industry, the sugar drinks, the Coca-Colas and all these other different drinks that were killing people, that were causing cancer, were causing cardiovascular disease, and a host of it. And he put his efforts into trying to stop and make sure that the sugar industry had to become honest. There's also vaccination, all kinds of people doing all different types of vaccinations. And there was a developing science of quality control. And it was all trying to put all these pieces together. Of course, the sugar industry became more and more powerful, and largely Mr. Wiley eventually, he ran out of energy, couldn't do any more, and the sugar industry started to flourish. We always say caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, but we need more. In the 1800s, homeopathy flourished, and it was around the world. There was many, many hospitals. In fact, there were more homeopathic hospitals than allopathic hospitals. After the Civil War, there was an incredible flu outbreak, a dramatic drop in their immunity. 10,000 people go to homeopathic hospitals, 98% live. 10,000 patients go to allopathic hospitals, 97% of them die. Homeopathy was flourishing at the time.
Starting with the Civil War, the canned foods industry grew. The original cans were soldered by hand, often with lead. Sometimes you didn't get the seams quite right, that you could have microorganisms could get in and breed and ferment. Most of the time that's pretty obvious to the consumer. The can will explode, you'll open it up and it'll be putrid, or you'll have some indication that the food is unfit for to be eaten. But as we found out later, obviously there were things like botulism and things like that that couldn't be seen, and the food seemed perfectly safe.
In the 19th century and up to 1906, in the U.S., the situation with food and drugs was essentially a free-for-all. There were no rules, there were no regulations, people could do whatever they wanted. A drug package would say, this cures cancer and scrofula and dandruff and corns and everything you can imagine. And it had 50 ingredients, all of which were nutty ingredients. It didn't make any difference. It was all promotion.
When the Bureau of Chemistry began in the 1860s, the focus really wasn't on consumer products, so not in the sense of foods or drugs or so on. They were more concerned with commodities of great interest to farmers. So they were looking at things like fertilizers. Harvey Washington Wiley came to the Department of Agriculture in 1883 from his post as professor of chemistry at Purdue University and as state chemist of the state of Indiana.
He is the person who, probably more than anybody else, functions as a visionary for sort of a science-based program of food, drug, chemistry regulation, applying principles of 19th century chemistry, in particular German chemistry, to regulatory issues in the United States. He hired a lot of scientists with European backgrounds, and he hired a lot of people from the land-grant college network in the United States. And that land-grant college network had been established in 1862 under the Morrill Land-Grant Act, but slowly each state began to build its own land-grant college, which was usually an agricultural or mechanical college, or in some cases both, as in Texas A&M. And the USDA began to recruit disproportionately from these schools. So it was a combination of European scientists and then sort of farm-grown, rurally socialized and developed boys coming off the farms who had gotten their science training at these land-grant colleges, and then here they were in Washington.
To protect the people, they needed to make the Pure Food Drug Act, starting the FDA in 1906. They needed to protect people of the claims that were made by charlatan manufacturers. But there was desperately a need for people to have some regulations, some rules for quality. As they expanded the FDA Act in 1938, Dr. Royal Copeland, a naturopath homeopath, fought real hard and was able to get homeopathy protected by the FDA. In the initial documents of the FDA, homeopathy appears on page 1 several times and was protected by the FDA because of Dr. Copeland.
The 1940s brought unprecedented activity in all areas of manufacturing and medical products. FDA took on the responsibility for testing and releasing penicillin and insulin and became a clearinghouse for information on quality control testing of pharmaceuticals and vitamin supplements. When the war began, the FDA began testing drugs for the military, among them new antibiotics and antimalarials that were being shipped overseas in billions of doses. FDA also developed tests to detect new synthetic pesticides in the food supply. In the Public Health Service, the Bureau of Biologics became responsible for more vaccines and for safeguarding blood and plasma for injured troops. A new era was beginning in medicine and nutrition as science was providing not only the means to create new products, but to test them for safety and effectiveness.
So on penicillin, which is the breakthrough for the industry, this was a very powerful drug, the most powerful drug up to the time, and the thing that made modern medicine was penicillin. It was created in a laboratory. The scientists in the laboratory offered it to industry, and industry said, nah, I don't think we need this. Maybe we can't patent it. Oh, we have to take it from this little mold and scale it up to huge vats. That's going to be complicated. It's not worth it. Industry was very risk averse. So what happened is the scientists brought it to the US, and it was a government laboratory that did the work. They built it up from a little mold to 20 times more powerful drug in big vats, and it was ready for delivery and use in World War II. And then the industry said, oh, now I get it. If we do research and we create life-saving drugs in our laboratory, we can sell products. We can build an entirely different model. Not just this junk that everybody sells as patent, you know, in a funny bottle, but really life-saving drugs.
There was definitely a need for regulations to control quality and safety and efficacy. This was really needed. The FDA needed to be established. And also to control the claims made by manufacturers. Well, this needed testing, science, research.
By the late 1940s, the first randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials were being performed on drugs in Europe and at the new National Institutes of Health under the U.S. Public Health Service. Up until this time, the FDA had been a central point of information for health agencies. Starting in 1949, the FDA began publishing guidance to industry as well. FDA published its first guidance to industry, Procedures for the Appraisal of the Toxicity of Chemicals in Foods, sharing its methods for safety testing in animals. By the 1950s, FDA-style animal studies and NIH-style human clinical trials had become the new standards against which all new product data was being compared. In 1953, the Federal Security Agency became the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. industry, academia, and the FDA moved into a new age in medical science.
In order to get a patent, you must prove that your compound has never existed before. You have to prove that it is not of nature, that you made it, it's never existed before. Thereby, any patent chemical is by definition unnatural, not of nature. But the patent allows you to control the profits for a number of times. Now, the first patent granted back in 1790 for a fertilizer, then started to patent different dyes used in the manufacture of clothing, then heroin, aspirin, 1897. And the patent became the craze because all of a sudden now you could make a lot of money. And they started to patent hormones. Even though the hormones were not quite the same, they knew that it wasn't the same. But as we started to understand more and more about this patent, we started to ignore the fact of the side effects. We started to look at the effect of it and how it could relieve different conditions. And some of these first medicines were compounds of extreme harm, and heroin and salafin and lysitol, things that are now like horrendous. And these companies started to really grow, that they started to put a lot of money, and they started to make a lot of money. What was really going on was borderline fraudulent. And as we could see, as this starts to grow, that the deaths from medicine were very small back in 1955. There's very few synthetics proportionately. But as we start to increase more and more synthetics, the iatrogenic disease from the medicine starts to grow, as we see in 85. By 2009, the conventional medicine, the synthetic compounds, are creating an awful lot of harm. And all of America is starting to wonder what pill they should take. And this is just making all different types of money for the drug companies. And it's a pharmacological fact that to use a synthetic anything is an insult to the body. But yet, that's what they want to do. They just want to keep insulting the body. And now it's become a very large killer. The side effects appear in the market. And you all become a guinea pig. And you just don't know when the side effects are going to kick in or not. Big Pharma is controlling of the FDA, as people who work and control the FDA are all coming from Big Pharma. And there's all kinds of pats on the back and grants and different types of things that give people because this. And we find out that if the synthetic drugs really did not work, would modern medicine be able to separate from it? The hospital supplies you with synthetics at every turn. Synthetic medicine has now taken over all of medicine. It's produced a major lie that the synthetic is equal to the natural. It is not. And the iatrogenic deaths from medical doctor caused, number one is from the pharmaceutical. And the side effects. And then they have pills for the other side effects, and pills for the other side effects, pills for the other side effects. All done under the watchful eye of the FDA as we start to see what's happening with these different drugs. And when one medicine was taken off, it should have been an alert, but now, when 20,000 drugs have been removed from the market from hurting people, when do we recognize the complete failure of this synthetic drug experiment? We know now that all diseases begin in the gut. We need to get the healthy gut flora. And what happens? Because inside the gut flora, that's where we start to manufacture the medicines. Now the evidence-based medicine, validation, verification is catching up with us, as we're now starting to find out that these germs inside the gut are very helpful. There's more germs than there are cells in the human body. And this is where we make the serotonin, the GABA, the dopamine, the oxytocin. We make these hormones in the gut that stabilize the health. We make them through natural means, but the drug companies wanted to make them through unnatural means so that they could get the profits of the patents. And the massive amounts of money that start to get into this, the massive amounts of control that's coming along, and even orphan drugs still have to be synthetic. Natural medicines start to be pushed away more and more as people are told not to take them. They're not pure. But yet we know that a synthetic anything is not of nature. And if you go to the restaurant, you're going to know you don't order synthetic foods. But now we start to find out that the FDA is controlled by Big Pharma. They're all puppets. And even though there's proof about the synthetic drugs, nobody wants to listen.
Howard, let's start with some context about how device regulation developed in the U.S. Can you walk us through the essential parts of the history of the FDA with respect to device regulation?
Sure, Paul, I'd be happy to do that. Actually, Congress created FDA in 1906 to deal with problems in the food industry, safety issues and the safety of the food supply in the United States. Originally, the agency had very limited authority over any products, but in 1938, there were a number of deaths that caused Congress to give FDA more authority with respect to drug safety. Drugs required approval for safety before they could be marketed. But that proved also not to be quite enough, as in 1962, Congress again expanded FDA's authority over drugs to provide that drugs had to be found efficacious before they could be put on the market as well. There was no specific regulation for devices until 1976. Prior to that time, FDA could take a device off the market if it proved to be unsafe, but they didn't have any authority to prevent devices from reaching the market. So there were products at the time that were so-called cancer cures that used colored lights to cure cancer, and if FDA would try to take that product off the market, the manufacturers would just change the colors and go back on the market again. So in 1976, Congress enacted amendments to the Food and Drug Act to cover medical devices, and Congress said in those amendments that devices like drugs had to be cleared before they could be allowed to go onto the market. The law also contained a number of specific rules with respect to compliance for medical devices as well. So the challenge was for Congress and for FDA, once the device law was passed, to figure out how to regulate products that could range from things as simple as bandages to very complex products like dialysis machines or pacemakers. When the law was enacted, Congress set up 3 classes of products according to risk. Additionally, they set up 3 pathways to market based on risk, for example, products that were exempt or products that could be shown to be substantially equivalent and marketed under a 510K, or products that required approval for safety and effectiveness, and that required a PMA. The Device Center, or the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, as it's now officially called, was set up to manage and oversee this process.
Validation and verification of your claims, even for devices, has now become the law. We got our device registered way back in 1989, more than 25 years ago. That's an old picture. Now it's over 30 years that we got it registered with the 510K by the FDA.
FDA will never do anything that crosses Big Pharma.
At a time when the level of consumer protection had never been higher, the lightning rod that attracted dissatisfaction with what now appeared to be an overly complicated scientific agency was saccharin.
As many people who were following the papers at the time will recall, saccharin, which had been generally recognized as safe until both Canadian and U.S. researchers conducted long-term toxicology tests on rats and discovered that male rats, though not female rats, got an excess of bladder cancers that was dose-dependent. And at that time, both the general parts of the food safety laws and the Delaney Amendment would have ruled out any food additive that caused cancer in laboratory animals. And so we announced that a ban of some kind had to go forward, and then the question was how would we execute that ban? That produced a storm of protests, and Congress held a number of hearings. I had to testify quite a lot. In the end, Congress essentially passed something called the Saccharin Labeling and Study Act, which asked the Institute of Medicine to do a study on the whole problem of saccharin and required warning labels. essentially set aside the provisions of the food safety laws as they applied to saccharin. We opposed that, of course, because FDA didn't think that there ought to be narrowly tailored exceptions to a general statute of that kind. But we had done what was required, and the Congress decided that the American people shouldn't have access to carcinogenic food additives unless there was one that they liked a lot.
But nothing fed the evil, bad gut flora more than the synthetic sweeteners. This incredible stuff is so bad, so unhealthy, so unnatural. It creates a massive problem. The FDA never paid attention to natural, only cared about patents and protecting the income of the drug companies. Now let's look at of some of the things that happened from Rockefeller and how he helped to build the FDA. Because he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present can affect our views of the past. Let's look at the FDA. Let me try to give you a true history. The Food and Drug Administration began known as the Division of Chemistry. And it was in chemistry that they started to work, and they were invested in the ideas of chemistry, didn't see the ideas of natural. They only understood chemistry. The name was changed to conceal its chemical industry agenda, to help fortify the chemical industry and its patents. It has always provided a type of legal immunity for companies that put chemicals into food. Pharmaceutical companies, patents, synthetics, approvals, relieve citizens without legal recourse. The original chemist from the Bureau of Chemistry in 1909, these people later will become the FDA. Its true job is to approve sanctioned products from the chemical industry and thereby legally shield the chemistry industry from us declaring that it is unsafe, stop them from being sued. They routinely privately gather data and share with their chemical industry partners to mitigate liability. For example, contamination information that they hide from the public. Good luck winning a case in U.S. court against a billion-dollar chemical company whose products are FDA approved or registered. You see, they're now GRAS, generally recognized as safe. They hide behind that. The modern FDA came into being in 1913, and the Rockefeller Foundation was created at the same time. The FDA was designed to work hand in hand as Rockefeller saw that oil could be made into synthetics and patents. The Rockefeller Foundation was founded in 1913 with its main emphasis on medicine, medical education, and synthetic medicine. The initial Rockefeller Medical School donations totaled over $500 million. 1928 alone, and the Rockefeller Foundation gave money to 18 medical schools across the 14 different countries. His partners at the FDA began an aggressive campaign of suppressing medicines that competed with the chemical industry. Homeopathy was discouraged. In fact, you couldn't get funding if you did homeopathy. They never have and never will approve a drug, as they said. Suppressed were natural medicines. Could not legally control monopolize with the drug. Natural substances cannot be patented. And without the patent, without the profit to protect them, they were discarded. This is why every natural and non-toxic therapy is automatically called quackery by the FDA. The chemicals industry now survives and flourishes. In 1919, $5 million Rockefeller Foundation gave to Canadian medical schools to help them to get into the 20th century, to get into synthetic drugs, synthetic patents. Medicine was not the lucrative market that it is today. So medical schools were begging for their grants, and they took whatever they could get. They needed the money, so they sold out to the synthetic chemical companies. Compliance to Rockefeller stipulation required abandoning traditional and natural medicines in lieu of a new generation of petrochemicals for drugs, and trashing entire libraries of past procedure. All the homeopathic hospitals and libraries were destroyed. So there was a book burning to try to get rid of all the naturopathy ideas, all the basic homeopathic ideas. The dissenters who embraced the old-time holistic naturopathic mythologies, these were labeled as quacks. They were demonized by the school. Some of these quacks won Nobel Prizes. They had vastly superior results, but they couldn't be allowed because profit took over. It was a carrot and stick strategy. Compliance schools were given the carrot, the money. Non-compliant schools got the stick, the FDA police. Some doctors died in prison, having cured patients with unproved natural medicines. It's still happening. Basically, the FDA is there to protect the chemical companies, protect big pharma, to discourage natural, to make sure that there are certain things that you just can't get. Doctors are not there to cure, doctors are there to palliate. Curing's illegal, since no cures are ever approved. Cure means freedom from the chemical dependence, freedom from them. And an unholy alliance formed between the AMA and the FDA and the Rockefeller Foundation. To assure compliance from the medical schools, the Rockefeller Foundation frequently insisted that medical schools replace with their own people, making sure that the dollar was always revered and that profit was put over people. The General Education Board of the Rockefeller Foundation in 1914 pledged $500,000 to the condition of the university and raised more money to help stamp out natural medicine. Standard and Oil, they made these chemicals, and these chemicals could be made into these synthetics. The synthetic could be patented. And yet our friend Rockefeller never took a synthetic drug. He only had natural medicines. He refused to take these pharmaceuticals. He knew how to live, not only how to make money, he knew how to live. He used traditional holistic medicines for his entire life, and he lived into the late 90s alongside of his friends at the FDA and the AMA, because they knew how to make money. After the hijack of the medical schools, the true carnage of polio, heart disease, and cancer explodes. As the weakened immune systems explode, all the different sugar drinks, everything takes off. Brain cancer specialist tells a story. And we see what Albert St. George, I worked with him, and what he was able to do in the American Cancer Society. Guess who founded them? It was J.D. Rockefeller. 1913, by donating at Harvard University. Do you believe that they will someday announce a cure and cut themselves off from the truckloads of money? See, there's no money in cure. There's money in dependency, getting people dependent onto their drug. The better question would be why vitamin C was a threat to their mission. Sensus cancer kills. People start to see what's really killing. And the medical system is causing problems. Even though they make money, they're causing bankruptcies elsewhere. We know that there's natural medicine cures, but cures of natural types, they have to be discouraged. The cyanide inside the almonds is very good and helps. Health food stores were stopped from selling B17. They even stopped B15 because it was almost like B17. You see, cancer is being killed and everything, and billions of dollars were lost. It's just amazing what was happening here, as that the FDA became able to stop natural medicine. Make sure that no research was founded make sure that this entire industry of natural medicine was put down. The British government followed suit, did a lot of the same type of things. People have been arrested and gone to jail just for doing natural medicine. And today, Big Pharma is making billions, trillions of dollars. Millions are dying from their synthetic drugs. All part.
FDA will never do anything that crosses Big Pharma.
Yes, the FDA is the junkyard dog for the chemical companies, protecting them, making sure that there's profit over people. But what about big tobacco? The FDA also helps to protect the interests of big tobacco.
2 decades ago, big tobacco had its existential moment. A landmark 1998 settlement with 46 U.S. states opened the door to more than $100 billion in liabilities. Big bankruptcies seemed imminent. The industry faced a future of increasing regulation and declining sales.
And what about that $100 billion? Well, actually, most of that $100 billion went into the development of new techniques to grow tobacco and new techniques to make cigarettes. They reinvested it. It was basically not spent on any damages. This is David Kessler. He was appointed head of the FDA, and he wanted to go after big tobacco. That was his job, to protect people. That's what he said. But they wouldn't let him because he was profit over people. The senators voted so many different laws, and that there really was, graft and corruption going on, where there was conflict of interest at a very high level. Now, there is a law that prohibits minors from buying and using, but this is not enforced. Police don't enforce this. There's no enforcement of reckless endangerment or any other factors. They are allowed to build their future customers. And when there was a massive judgment against them, they just sheltered it and went off.
The yeas are 79 and the nays are 17. The bill as amended is passed.
With that historic 8-second announcement, a 50-year battle with big tobacco is all but over this morning. The legislation will now go back to the House for final passage, then on to the desk of President Obama, himself a smoker, who said he will sign it. The FDA gaining sweeping powers to regulate how cigarettes and other tobacco products are made and marketed. Miracles still happen. That was the reaction from Senator Ted Kennedy, the bill's sponsor. He's battling brain cancer and couldn't be there to witness the vote. Here's what's in the Senate measure. Within 3 months, candy and fruit-flavored cigarettes banned because of their appeal to children. Within 12 months, new warning labels will be required, covering up to half the packaging. Also in a year, tobacco companies will be banned from making cigarettes branded as low tar, light, or mild. And the FDA now gaining the power to force big tobacco to reduce nicotine levels in cigarettes. That could make it a lot easier for the 20% of Americans who still smoke to stop.
Joe Camel will be given a life sentence and put away forever.
Big tobacco makes a compound that just kills. It does nothing positive whatsoever for the body. And many, many people work to destroy big tobacco. And they just couldn't do it. And finally, big tobacco and the money and the power got the FDA to protect and preserve the tobacco industry. Big money wins. But what about homeopathy? The FDA was started by a homeopath.
In our Health Alert tonight, the FDA is revising their guidelines for homeopathic products.
Now, the goal is to help protect Americans from potentially harmful products, including some that are even made with known poisons.
Our chief health editor, Dr. Partha Nandi, joins us now with more.
The homeopathy market is booming and has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's not surprising since estimates predict that a third of Americans are using these so-called remedies. Now, homeopathy is an alternative medical practice with roots dating back to the 1700s, and it's based on the belief that your body can really cure itself. Now, you might have heard it referred to as quote-unquote like cures like. So here's what that means, that if a substance produces certain symptoms in someone who's healthy, then theoretically the same substance can be diluted and then given to someone who is sick with similar symptoms and can then trigger the body's natural defenses to kick in. Now, here's the problem. The FDA says that these products are made from a wide range of substances, which include quote-unquote ingredients derived from plants, healthy or diseased animal or human sources, minerals and chemicals, including sometimes possibly known poisons. On top of that, if products are not manufactured safely, they have the potential to cause significant and permanent harm. So here's what the FDA is doing. The FDA has revised its guidance document, and now it outlines which categories of homeopathic products pose a higher risk to public health and which methods of consumption and ingredients you need to watch out for. So when it comes to these types of products, I want you to be aware of this. First, homeopathic products are not currently reviewed for safety and effectiveness by the FDA. So just because the label says it's natural does not mean it's safe. And secondly, if you have a serious health condition, please speak to your doctor about treatment options. You need to be careful when it comes to false marketing and unproven concoctions. Now, the new FDA guidelines are not finalized yet. They're looking for public feedback first. But overall, I feel like this is really good news, as it allows the FDA to really crack down on fraudulent and potentially harmful products. For 7 Action News, I'm Dr. Parthanandi.
Like we said, homeopathy was flourishing back in the 1800s, but then the big money, big pharma came in and basically destroyed it. And the FDA was shaped by homeopaths, and the FDA protected homeopathy, but still, there was a problem with proof. There was a problem with validation. You see, the FDA has to be able to stop crazy claims made by manufacturers, and homeopaths were making such crazy claims. So the FDA really did need to step in. And now the FDA has told everybody that we need to do experimentation and testing to make sure that homeopathic products are safe. Money and power do shape things, and pig pharma, see, the FDA workers fight to get a taste of the teat, and that there is conflict of interest. It happens. It can't be stopped. The FDA is designed to be a good agency, but yet there is conflict of interest. It can't be controlled completely. It has to be discouraged, but there is ways that they can get people money through grants and jobs for relatives and etc. There are favors that can be done that help to get drugs approved, because most of these drugs do have this type of effect where they need to have somebody to push them through. And now we know that there are thousands of drugs that are recalled, thousands of drugs, and that the synthetic experiment has failed, and that big sugar is killing people. We now need to understand that we can't just let big money control the FDA anymore. We have to get back to the core of trying to protect people. And we have to recognize that big tobacco does nothing, and it addicts our children, as we really need to get into the idea. But we can see that that the FDA is really trying to help. There are good people in the FDA doing good work, but then there are a couple of John Wayne cowboys that affect things adversely. So it's time that we start to really address and look back. Now, the FDA started to attack me. You can read about this in certain articles. You can see that the FDA wants to try to fight against anybody who's into natural medicine. When I got my device registered back in 1989, that made the FDA very angry. When I was then able to register acupuncture needles, that made them very angry. The FDA started to try to attack me with a personal attack. They trumped up charges. They made ludicrous charges. I was taken to court in 1996, and Judge Maitch reversed that decision. We have to understand that the FDA and this power and the control that they have, this Gestapo agency, cannot be used to fight people like Rife. We have to try to work with people more. We got our device registered. Here's the FDA registration of the electrophysiological zeroid from 1989. I got acupuncture needles registered with the FDA. And the FDA was very angry at this. They launched a harassment against me, trumped up charges, took me to court. Judge Maitch released me, and I went to hundreds of hours of FDA training in order to understand how to get devices registered. So I became an international lawyer. And I started to help people. And I started to recognize that the FDA was fighting against natural medicine, raiding health food stores, all based on ideas to try to protect patents. And in order to get a patent, you have to prove that it's not of nature. But the patent allows you to control profit, and profit over people steps in. Well, we now need to know that there is a natural medicine. It does work. We need to spread the word. We need to work against the ideas that are attacking natural medicine. But natural medicine has to be able to get clear and more clear to be able to do testing. Of course, I am a little provocative. Yes, that is a nipple. Yeah, I am a little provocative because we need to talk. Provocative means to talk. All disease begins in the gut. We need to now recognize this. We need to get back to nature. It's in our gut is where the hormones that are made that stabilize the mind and the body. We need to be able to get back. And we need to recognize what not to eat. And the synthetics is one of the big things not to eat. And we have to stop the FDA from protecting the synthetic drug process. So we have to start to expand our mind and protect people. Let's hear some good words about the FDA. Now let's take a look at a more positive viewpoint of the FDA history.
What should people know about the FDA?
This is a regulatory agency. Its primary job is to enforce the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. But it's also the oldest consumer protection agency now in the country. So it can be seen as an enforcement agency and as a consumer protection agency.
It regulates substances in the form of foods and drugs and cosmetics and medical devices. And it regulates words in the form of the labeling and the labels used for those products.
The FDA regulate many things. At the same time, there are many other things they don't regulate. And if you want to worry about what it's doing and not doing, you have to take a look.
The FDA regulates most food and food additives, drugs, and products that make health claims. It also regulates cosmetics and skincare products. It regulates medical devices and radiation-emitting products, including DVD players and cell phones. It's responsible for vaccines and the blood supply, as well as foods and medicines for animals. Because its job is investigating and prosecuting health fraud, it's been part of almost every public health debate in the past 100 years. It has occupied a difficult place between consumers and businesses, and it has done so by relying on a long tradition of credible science and effective law enforcement. This is the story of the United States Food and Drug Administration, where it came from, what it does, and how it does it, and why this small group of civil servants has been so effective in protecting the health of Americans for more than 100 years.
Well, there are problems with allopathy. There are problems with big pharma, big tobacco, big sugar. There's lots of problems with these evil ultra-rich and what they're doing. But the FDA is trying to do a good job, and there are good people in the FDA. And we need to work to validate and verify claims. We need to stop the witch hunt against natural medicine and recognize that nature knows, and nature has the ultimate validation and verification. So I wanted to present a little history of the FDA for you and some of the problems that have happened. And let's now start putting people